But way back where I come from, we never mean to bother. We don't like to make our passions other people's concern. And we walk in the world of safe people, and at night we walk into our houses and burn.
That is one of my favorite songs of all time. That is Dar Williams, Iowa. Welcome back, young scholars. In this video, we will be discussing Iowa state government. It's part of our unit on federalism. The big questions you should be able to answer after watching this video are, first, what are the characteristics of Iowa state government? And second, how has our state government lived up to the Iowa state motto? First, what are the characteristics of the Iowa state government? Whenever you're answering a question about government, you almost always seem to come back to the good old U.S. Constitution. And so that's where we'll start. In Article 4, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution, it states, "The United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union a republican form of government." And that's really the extent of what the Constitution has to say about state governments. So the U.S. Constitution requires all states to establish a republican form of government, which, as you know, hopefully, means that there is representative democracy in each of the states. Citizens of the states vote for representatives to make decisions on their behalf at the state level, which means, you know, as much as I want to be the king of Iowa, there will be no Schumocracy where Mr. Schumann is the king. Now, each state also has its own constitution, so the rules of state government are set forth in each individual state constitution. You can see here a map showing the dates in which each state constitution was last drafted. So you may notice some interesting things like the Montana State Constitution, 1973. So it's a fairly recent constitution. Illinois, 1971. Obviously, they had earlier versions of the Constitution, but they rewrote their Constitution in those years. The Iowa State Constitution from 1857 makes it one of the older constitutions. You'll also notice that it is one of the less amended constitutions. The next thing I would like you to do is to review that Iowa State Constitution. So down below, you'll find a link to the Iowa State Constitution, which you should just take a few minutes to just not read word for word, but instead just sort of skim and get a sense of what the various major articles of the Iowa State Constitution are. Hopefully you've taken Government 1 class, and so you have a general blueprint for the U.S. Constitution. And one of the things that I want you to do, if you can, is to write down some observations about the similarities and differences between the U.S. Constitution and the Iowa State Constitution. So, for example, is there the equivalent of a Bill of Rights in the Iowa State Constitution? If there is, are there particular amendments that are written in similar ways to the amendments that you learned, the first 10 amendments of the U.S. Constitution? What is the structure of the Iowa State Constitution in terms of the various branches? So take a minute, pause the video, and read the Iowa State Constitution. I'll also put a link to the U.S. Constitution, and so if you want to review that as well, you can. All right, so the current Iowa State Constitution was written in 1857 in the old Capitol right here in Iowa City. That used to obviously be the state capital before it was moved to Des Moines. Now, it contains 48 amendments, so you can make a comparison there to the U.S. Constitution, right? The U.S. Constitution has 27 amendments. The Iowa State Constitution has 48 amendments, but that's actually relatively few for state constitutions. State constitutions tend to get amended more often than the federal Constitution. So you'll notice here this map is actually wrong. It shows here that there are 50 to 100 amendments in Iowa, but in actuality there are only 48 amendments currently. As always, you're going to have some problems with your original draft of the Constitution that you're going to have to rework. This was one of my favorites. So in Article 2, Section 5, it states, people that are disqualified from voting, no idiot or insane person or person convicted of any infamous crime shall be entitled to the privileges of an elector. So you lost your voting rights if you were an idiot. Now, meaning of idiot has changed since the 1850s when this provision was written. But recently, there was an amendment to the Iowa State Constitution, the 47th Amendment, which rewrote this section and stated a person adjudged mentally incompetent to vote or a person convicted of any infamous crime shall not be entitled to the privileges of an elector. Another thing that maybe you caught as you were looking through the Iowa State Constitution, the duties of the governor. It says Section 8, he shall transact all executive business with the officers of the government. Anyone see a potential problem there? Yeah, we got our pronoun issue because the current governor of the state of Iowa is not a he. This is the current governor of the state. This is Kim Reynolds. And so there's always a question about whether or not you go back and rewrite the language of the constitutions to address issues around pronouns. And it's not something that Iowa has done yet. So the Iowa Constitution establishes 3 separate branches of government. It was patterned after the U.S. model of government with 3 separate branches with separation of powers and checks and balances. So we have a legislative branch. It is a bicameral General Assembly. That's what it's referred to. We don't call it Congress. We call it the General Assembly. It is made up of a House of Representatives and a Senate, and those bodies obviously make the laws for the state of Iowa. Here we have the Iowa State Capitol, where our Iowa legislators work. On one side of the building, we have the Iowa State Senate, which is, I think, located on the 3rd floor of the state capitol. And then on the other side, we have our House of Representatives. The Iowa State House is composed of 100 members. They serve 2-year terms, and so you have to run for re-election every 2 years in the Iowa State House, and that's very similar to the U.S. House of Representatives, where there are 2-year terms. You can see here a map of the various districts, House districts across Iowa. Now, our House districts are divided up by population. So you can see smaller districts in some of the more urban areas, larger districts in some of the more rural areas. Each House member serves roughly 30,000 constituents in Iowa. Now, the Iowa Senate has 50 members, and they serve 4-year terms, so slightly different than the U.S. Senate, which has 6-year terms and has 100 senators. One of the differences between the way the Iowa Senate works and the U.S. Senate is the U.S. Senate is based upon the concept of equal representation. So each state gets 2 representatives in the U.S. Senate. But in Iowa, the Iowa State Senate is also determined by population. And you can see here a map that shows the Senate districts. And again, you can see higher concentrations in the urban areas and bigger districts in more rural parts of the state. In the Senate, you represent on average about 60,000 Iowans. Now, there's also an executive branch in Iowa. You have a governor who carries out the laws, much like our president in the federal government. The current governor in Iowa is Kim Reynolds. She is a Republican.
I, Kimberly K. Reynolds,
I, Kimberly K. Reynolds,
do solemnly swear
that
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Iowa,
and the Constitution of the State of Iowa,
and that I will faithfully and impartially, to the best of my knowledge and ability, discharge the duties incumbent upon the office of Governor of the State of Iowa, as now or hereafter required by law. Congratulations.
So there we see Kim Reynolds and her swearing in ceremony, where she's taking the oath of office and pledging to uphold and execute the laws of the state of Iowa. Now, the third branch of Iowa state government is the Supreme Court. This is a 7-member court that interprets the law. So if you're looking for differences between Iowa state government and federal government, we have 7 members of the Iowa State Supreme Court, whereas the U.S. Supreme Court has 9 members. Recently, there's been a lot of turnover in the Iowa State Supreme Court. These 2 members are no longer serving on the Iowa State Supreme Court, but they've been replaced through a process where the governor appoints new members. So as you can see, there are a lot of similarities and some differences between Iowa state government and the U.S. government. And so as a result of watching this video, you should be aware of some of those characteristics of the Iowa state government and how the Iowa Constitution establishes 3 branches of government, much like the US Constitution. In the next video, we will be discussing the role that Iowa state government has played in ensuring certain rights and ensuring the protection of some of those rights. Thanks for watching.